color, our brain's perception of color, and how light plays a role in the color that we see. Back in the early 1600s, Isaac Newton first discovered what we call now as the visible spectrum. What that is basically the colors of the rainbow. When light is refracted and you see its natural properties, you get what we call Roygbiv: red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, and violet. Now, indigo and blue, back when Isaac discovered it, he broke it up into those two separate pieces. Nowadays, scientists have agreed to just combine those as one. So we got red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. And that's what's considered the full visible spectrum. And within that range, we can get an infinite amount of colors, which I think is incredibly fascinating. Just like between 0 and 100, you can have, 1 and 100, you can have an infinite amount of numbers within that range. Within the points, we can create multiple different colors within our visible spectrum. And that's how we see different colors. And the light source that's illuminating those surfaces affect that. So let me break it down a little bit. There's 4 parts that happen. You need a light source. Specifically, the sun is the original light source, and that's what we try and base our models off of when manufacturers create light and try and replicate that. Nothing can replicate the sun. I'll just say that right now. There's multiple light sources. There's incandescent and there's luminescent. Incandescent is a heat source. Now that's like fire, the sun, candlelight, tungsten lamps. Luminescent is fluorescent lamps. They're LEDs, and they're basically non-heat sources, and they usually don't contain the full spectrum in there. So that's why I just want to talk about it, to help you guys understand why lighting is so important, especially in interiors where we don't get adequate daylight in to light the surfaces that we're trying to get to perceive. So back to number 1, we need a light source. Number 2, we need an object. So that light, the waves from the light is hitting an object. And then the third thing that happens is the energy either gets absorbed and part of that energy gets reflected back. And depending on its molecular structure or its makeup, that depends on what wavelengths of light are getting reflected back. So, for example, the full spectrum of light is hitting an object, and it's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. And what's getting reflected back are the blue waves, and that's what your eyes pick up. So you see the color blue. Now the fourth thing that affects color that's often been overlooked, that is very crucial, is our brain's perception of it, specifically the human brain. So most neuroscientists agree that color is a phenomenon that's created in the brain. Which I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly fascinating. And we take it for granted, and you look at to help prove this concept, you think of like dogs. We got Ram over here. He's laying down taking a nice big nap because we just had a big day at the vet and did a little walk, and so he's zonked out for the rest of the day. But his whole world is consistent of shades, light shades, some browns, and whites and blacks, and he gets a whole array of the shades that he sees and some dark pigments, but he doesn't see the blues or the greens or the reds, because he's lacking certain cones within his eyes that pick those up. And so within our human eyes, we have cones. We have long wave cones, medium wave cones, and short wave cones. The long wave cones are what's picking up the reds. The medium wave cones are picking up the greens. The short wave cones are picking up the blues and the violets. And so now there's a few colors missing there, right? Yeah, so if it's picking up just those 3 waves, how do we see all the other colors? The brain actually fills in all the gaps. So and that's very important too when we're talking about lighting design, I think, and I'll get here to it, but when we see color, it's relative. So the brain's processing all this information, and it's actually using other colors, other references, blacks and whites for borders and shapes to tell where one object ends and one object begins, and without that we wouldn't even be able to see color. So I know I'm kind of getting ahead here, but I'll show you guys at least the principles and why it's so important to have good light so we can see all the amounts of color that we're supposed to. So right now this is I'm not tied to any product or brand, just want to get that out there. This is Nora LED. So as I said earlier, usually LEDs aren't thought to contain the full spectrum. They've gotten pretty far along now, which is really nice. That's why it's important to get a high quality LED, because this is white right now, considered a 3700 a warm white, and you get different tones of white when you get the full visible spectrum in there. You get your red, orange, yellow, green, and blue and violet. You can also get white by combining red, green, blue, and skipping the rest too. So manufacturers that do that, you're not going to see the full color of your interior or I guess your exterior art at night if you're doing that, or a building facade. Usually the daylight will absolutely overpower any electric light that you have, so that's not really relevant there. But so if we take the light source and put it through a prism, you can see right there that rainbow, and I see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, and that's an LED. And this is a very cost affordable LED product from Nora. It's their M2 series. And then you take something like this, for example. I don't know who still designs with compact fluorescence, but I still see a lot of them around there. You take this, and you can see that rain is very faint. If I see a little bit of red, a little bit of violet, and a little bit of blue and some yellow in there. So I'm going to show you. As you can see, we have a picture right here, and it's got a little bit of the red, the orange, and the green, which is usually kind of I think the weakest point in the LEDs here. But if you take something like this and hit your art on the wall, that makes the color pop. And keep in mind it's relative too, so if we were flooding the whole room with light, this wouldn't stand out as much. So it's accenting points that you want to hit, and then the light source, if it has the full color spectrum, is going to allow you to see the natural color of what you're trying to light. Now, this is not 80 or 90 CRI. Their CRI is different. That's measuring color tones, and my personal opinion, someone else might have different recommendations out there, but I think CRI is just not an adequate way to measure color, because it doesn't tell you which way the color shift is going. Whether it's, you may have more of the greens or more of the oranges, but it doesn't tell you if that quantity that you have is actually shifting in hue or saturation, which could make the color look a lot more flat. There is a new test out there called TM30 that I would highly recommend you do. And again, it's relative, so if you have like a retail store where you want to highlight your reds and your greens then you look for a TM30 chart where it's showing that those colors are more saturated. And learning to read one of those charts, you gotta be pretty much a specialist in it, but the manufacturers are starting to put those out there more in their circle chart. They show the color spectrum in a circle graph, and if the graph is on the outside borders, it's more saturated. If it's inside, it's less. So if you wanted something that was to highlight your blues or your reds, then you would try and pick something with that TM30 chart showing those are more accentuated, because it is relative and it will make those pop out more, rather than just washing everything the same and keeping it all uniform. So we have this LED that we saw the full color spectrum. The CFL we did not. I don't know if you can see, that's pretty dull there compared to something like that. The red, the orange pops out a lot more, and yeah. So while our brain is interpreting the color, and it will change this, it's important to know it's not going to be like that all the time. If you have a window and there's different amounts of daylight getting in, but when it's dark or when it's even, you kind of light for low light, nothing's going to replace daylight. You should have that in there if you can with windows. If not, then we want to supplement electric lighting and layer in the lights. Ambient lighting to fill the space, you know, the luminescent glow. We want accent lighting to create a feeling, because to make that art pop on the wall. And there is lots of science behind it too, and then studying and learning that science, you can help create more beautiful, more eloquent pieces of art and help make statements stand out more. And then we use task lighting for the third layer for better performance, increased focus and clarity, because the amount of light that's getting let into your eyes helps your brain perceive certain details better without having to strain.